All right. So it's 6:30 right on the dot. So let's just go ahead and get started. It's okay if folks are joining in a couple minutes late. But we really want to reserve some time for our panel this evening. So just want to say hi and good evening. Welcome everybody to Reading Isn't Optional, our summer wrap up. We're so glad to have you here tonight for this Virginia and DC joint chapter event. It's wonderful to bring our communities together to connect with one another and continue the important work of making reading and literacy a priority. Before we get started, I want to take a short moment to thank our incredible board and committee members here in Virginia. Next slide, please. Events like tonight don't happen without the time, energy, ideas, and commitment that so many volunteers contribute behind the scenes. Thank you for making this evening possible. And for anyone who is hailing from the Commonwealth, if you've ever thought, I'd love to get more involved, we would love to have you. We're always looking for folks to join our committees, lend their talents, and help plan events, building the collaborations like the one we're celebrating tonight. Thank you for being here, and let's have a great evening together. DC?
Good afternoon, everyone. So happy that you're here. We're really excited to join the Reading League Virginia for this wrap-up session together. And here are the board members. Our president is here, Laura Kravis, and Dory Clark is our vice president. And then we've got all the board of directors listed below. We're super excited for our hour together today.
And as part of the Reading League, we are united by a shared mission to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned reading instruction. Our vision is that every educator is prepared to implement evidence-aligned practices that meet the diverse profiles of all students with the goal of helping every student become a skilled, lifelong reader. After all, reading isn't optional.
So we want to start with engaging the group in what struck a chord with you reading this book and engaging in the book study. There were a lot of challenging concepts and ideas, and depending on who you are, what your role is, where you work, all of those things, it's probably landed in different ways. So we chose several quotes that encapsulated some of these ideas throughout the book, and we want to share these with you. And we want to encourage you when one hits a chord, something that you perhaps remember is like, I loved that chapter, yes, or that writer, or that research. We want to engage you in a little bit of dialogue just with the next couple, few slides. So for this little engagement activity, you can, if you don't want to unmute, drop it in the chat. That's also fine. But we do want to encourage you to unmute and engage in a little bit of dialogue around these ideas, because the quotes that have been chosen are pretty powerful and hit some of the really big ideas in the text. So for example, this first quote here, if we want to accelerate learning, we cannot avoid engaging students in challenging text. This one, I'll start with my chord, and then I hope a few of you can chime in. This hits a chord because this idea validated a lot of, the practices that we see often in that are wrong, the ineffective practices. So it was nice to read in the book about like audio only. We shouldn't be doing that. We can't grow our readers if we're the ones doing all the reading. So we can't avoid them, even though they're going to struggle. But there are ways to engage them in complex text and keep the rigor there. I loved this quote, and it's on the forefront of my mind for our older readers. And some of the strategies that were shared in chapter 10 were really, I knew a lot of them before, but it's nice to be reminded. And also there were some new ones. So that's what struck a chord with me. Did this quote or this idea of complex text for all strike a chord with anyone else? Thank you. Watered down texts lead to watered down understandings for sure.
Yeah, I agree. This whole chapter I really liked because it was like it's just one of these like lodestars you have to keep up there while we're doing all these many things, and we're always trying new things, and we're always, shifting our gears to kind of hit more kids where they are and everything, and that's important to do, but in service of getting kids to challenging texts, right? Because of that, remember that stair step that came out with the with Common Core, right? The idea that if kids are always reading what they can already read, they never get anywhere, right? So we have to keep stretching and keep pulling with scaffolds. But that chapter also really hit me hard.
Agreed. Like we struggle with this a lot. Like in our middle school, we use a very rigorous curriculum and students are engaged in whole text novels. And the teachers feel like they have to read every single thing aloud because that's the way that they are checking for understanding or that students have actually read it. And some of those practices are still holding true, like in the high school classrooms that I support. And so it's like telling and letting teachers know, like we are not teaching like every single word of the text, like and also like reorienting them around like different routines and structures that we can do in the classroom to really place the responsibility back on the students for the reading, because the reality is in Virginia, like we have our end of course, exams and then also our SOLs. But if the teacher is the one who's doing all of the reading in class and reading aloud, then the student is not really going to be successful when they take that reading test because they haven't actually spent very much time in class reading. And so I will say that it's hard to let go of control. I work side by side with teachers a lot of like that. Oh, but if I don't do this, then they won't have every single thing. I was like, you're right, they won't. But when they are doing choral reading, when they're doing partner reading, when they're, like when you're pulling out like the juicy sentences and the juicy passages, that's what we really want them to hold on to. So it also struck a chord with me. I'm facts like I think photocopied. I don't think it was chapter 10. I can't remember, but the one on comprehension and the mental models of comprehension, and shared it with like every high school middle school teacher that I've been working with. And so I think some of them are, and I guess I'm committing copyright fraud, but I'm sharing that chapter widely to kind of like just broaden our understanding of comprehension and how we're helping students with comprehension.
Could I add on to that? I was going to say, especially in the elementary school level, I feel like some of this boils down to is we struggle to watch kids struggle and we don't want to see them struggle. And sometimes we forget that that struggle is part of it. And so we from the goodness of our own hearts want to make things easier for them without realizing that that productive struggle within a challenging text is part of all of this.
Agreed. We're going to move on to the next quote.
All right, so the next one is from chapter 6, fluency. Maybe that strikes a chord alone, right? Just that alone. So poor fluency often brings a number of challenges that can negatively affect students' self-esteem. They frequently display antisocial, disruptive, or withdrawn behaviors to avoid engaging in tasks with which they struggle. Okay, so fluency and behaviors. Anything there striking a chord with anyone? Right, Savannah. So it says we see students start to break down their opinion, they start to give up. So often when students are challenged and it's maybe not an area of strength for them, or they're having that self-doubt, right, that's affecting their self-esteem, because if it is such a struggle for them, then they start to display some of those behaviors because they'd rather, right, act out than show that their difficulty with reading. So that reading and behavior often coincide. And I've worked with students, I'm a special education teacher working with students with behaviors, and we also realize, are we teaching them and in providing that instruction appropriately? Yeah, that work avoidance, absolutely.
I think that you bring up a good flip side of it too. So yes, they show that disruptive behavior, but I feel like it's even more critical to start creating that classroom environment where, number one, teachers hear their students read in middle school, right? Or in secondary. So teachers need to be able to hear those students. They assume they're coming into sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, and I never have to hear them read again. So creating that culture, and I think you touched on it too about that fluency in terms of we're all reading together, or we find a partner, we're having some reading time in there, that culture of like it's just normal to read in a classroom even though we're in middle school. So yes, I think we've all seen some kind of behavior come out when they're not strong, capable readers, but we have to create something to build that as well.
Right. And assume, right. That's also a big piece of this puzzle, is that there's assumptions that take place. And while you guys really went on a roll here with a lot of things. So yeah, then you start to see those avoidance behaviors, trips to bathrooms and nurse and talking with their friends. I see some comments here and talking about content teachers. That's a good connection there. Laura, thank you for mentioning that, right? That connection in the secondary level. Again, I think because they're assuming that maybe students have these skills. Um, a couple likes on that one as well.
I can't help but to think about like the long lasting effect, right? If there's a domino effect, let's say from elementary school, and it starts there. And as they get older, and we're talking about literacy in adolescence, but even think about beyond high school and quality of life and all aspects of life that it can impact students, especially when we're thinking about like graduation as being so important for a lot of our students. Then what? So I just see like when we're talking about these social challenges and behavioral needs, it could really impact life.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And as you said, building
Go ahead,
culture.
Angela.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Brandy was saying too, that culture is so important, that Danielle was also mentioning those social emotional pieces, and then building those skills, as Mike had mentioned too, resilience, frustration tolerance, which are also those life skills.
The It's striking a chord, which also is one of our next quotes, which is like, the class is a spectrum of skill levels. Some students devour complex with ease, while others struggle to decipher even the simplest messages. So what strikes the chord?
This is like the crux of it all, right? This is what every teacher has to do every day. This is so hard, right? It's hard. It's a really hard job. But if we're working with a text that isn't going to challenge everybody, we're not really helping ourselves, I feel like, in the end.
This strikes a chord with me because I think about the gap between um, advanced phonemic awareness and morphology. And so you have students that are kind of in that space where they don't quite have a firm grasp of the, how to decode the words somewhat. And then they have these multisyllabic words. So it's like, there's a struggle here, but I still can't quite get over that hump. So, what we do to fill that gap, we talked about fluency and how we, foster that in our classrooms. To me, that is a part of that struggle between that deciphering the simplest passages and then, of course, devouring the complex. Those who devour it, they have a firm grasp of morphology. But the ones who struggle, they're still somewhere in between.
Jacqueline, I agree. And also too, I've found that like, and supporting with a lot of my middle school English teachers, is that it's the syntax that's really challenging for a lot of students. And explicit grammar instruction isn't something that a lot of our teachers feel very comfortable teaching and breaking down and learning how to break down or even model like their think aloud, like as they're looking at difficult text. And I will say that in our curriculum that we use within my division, we have like what's called a deep dive, where it's actually looking at what you would call like a juicy sentence, right? And it's looking at that syntax, and it's helping with that grammar instruction, and then also like that sentence construction. And oftentimes it's missed or skipped because we run out of time because we've been reading the text aloud, or it's because I don't feel really comfortable with this part. And so it's trying to kind of like help understand the importance of that syntax and sentence structure and how important that is at the middle school and high school level, because as text becomes more complex, it's oftentimes that students are like lost in the antecedent, right? They're lost in the dependent and independent clauses, and they're not really sure like what it's referring to. And helping our teachers really understand that like it's a combination of all of these things. And we just need to like, slowly make moves in that direction, and lean into the hard and uncomfortable, to really help our students thrive.
I think this is a great push also for some read alouds, right, in our classrooms in middle school too. Like all of those things that you just said, but also, when we're struggling, I think that goes along with that think aloud, read alouds. How do we kind of expose them to some of that complexity as well if they're not able to read it on their own independently?
Yes, and I want to I see Brandy's here about why building professional knowledge versus learning a program is key, because you can't pivot and differentiate with the kids in front of you if you don't have the actual knowledge. If you're depending on a program to do that, you will be disappointed. All right, our last quote for the evening: "At the heart of comprehension, difficulties lies in." Let me start over. At the heart of comprehension, difficulties lie a stalled process. Students are not just misinterpreting the text, they're failing to build a coherent mental model that anchors meaning in memory. I loved Brooken's chapter. It was a lovely explanation of cognitive science, learning science, science of reading, all those things kind of integrated all together in his chapter, and talked about the memory that remains, which is what is different for all students depending on all the incredibly complex potential barriers that are getting in the way for students of making meaning. So that idea that he describes, that it's not a linear thing where students move fluidly through surface code, text space, and situation model, that they move fluidly throughout those stages, and also that's text dependent on and reader dependent based on where they are in that journey, and that it's not one before the other, and then you're just finally always comprehending text, right? It is text and reader dependent. So I loved that chapter. I thought it was great. Anybody else?
I went back and rewatched the first recording from National, where he was giving specific examples of how a student would respond in each of those levels of mental models, and then how he would use student language to help push them to the next level or help scaffold up to the next level. And I use that in my Welcome Week training for new teachers, for our sixth grade teachers, of like how they could quickly diagnose with their students based on the question that they ask, where their students are sitting in their mental model and what's my next instructional move in the moment, to help each of those students like progress, like as they're building their understanding of the entire text. And so like this chapter is the chapter that I've copied again and again and again. And I really loved how he broke down like in that, in the recording as well, which is still available online, how he really worked through like really diagnosing where students were so that he could really make in the moment instructional decisions to help students.
The various quotes you guys have put up so far actually remind me of the power of jigsaw activities. If you're lucky to be reading a chapter book at any grade level, you might be in a position to say, okay, we're going to break out into groups, and then within the group, each child is a different expert, whether it's at the word level, the sentence level, the paragraph level, or the chapter level. And if it's a jigsaw activity that you can like make a routine, each kid could be an expert at each of those levels over the course of the year. So they do learn to make a mental model that when you read, sometimes you go really deep with a word or a phrase. Sometimes you go really deep with a sentence or a symbol in a sentence. Sometimes you just have to focus on one paragraph to get the whole thing, or sometimes you just need to know how to summarize a whole chapter. And I feel like if there's all these weaknesses and differences or differences in strengths, that just having that kind of routine will make it possible for them to get the flavor and build those mental models to do that kind of work and thinking more, if not better.
Well, I want to thank you all for engaging in our little quote strike a chord activity. That was fun. It was really nice to hear all of your reflections and that we had a similar experience in reading this book and going through the book study with the National Book Study. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over, and it is now time for us to hear from our panel.
All right, thank you. So we will be having our panel discussion now, so can't wait to hear from all the folks that we have joining us here today. So I'll introduce our panel, and if you'll just give a quick hello, and then we'll dive into the questions so you all can hear all the wonderful things and their expertise. So we'll start off with Savannah Campbell from Gloucester County Public Schools. She is a multi-tiered systems of support. Savannah, you want to say hi?
Yes, hi. I'm so excited to be here. Sorry, I can't see myself, so I didn't know. It's good to see you guys.
All right, next, Michael Krusco, who is a retired professional. He previously worked with Virginia Tiered Systems of Support, the Research and Implementation Center. There he is.
Evening. Good to see everyone tonight. Look forward to chatting with everyone.
All right, and next we have Stephanie Dale, interventionist at the school and district level in Stafford County Public Schools.
Hi, everyone. Inspired already. So thanks for having me.
And Kim McGrath from Chesapeake, Director of Academic Support.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to continue this conversation.
Awesome. So we'll have some questions we'll go through and hear from our panel of experts here. So this question is for everyone on our panel here. What misconceptions do you frequently encounter when discussing MTSS with colleagues?
I'll go first. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. In thinking about this and relating kind of back to the book, The Reading Isn't Optional, that book, it really drove home that fundamental truth that literacy is an equity issue, and building systems to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our students will really kind of shatter some of those myths. And the first misconception that really came to mind for me is that it's just a hoop. MTSS is just a hoop to go through to get to special education identification. I hear that a lot. I very rarely hear tier 1. I hear, oh, tier 2 and tier 3, and immediately think, oh, if I can just get through these interventions, and they'll get identified because that's what they need. But I think we really, as MTSS leaders, have to start flipping that script and talking about it's not a place, it's not a program, and it's not a path to testing. It's proactive and it's preventative, and it's a framework for that. Here in Chesapeake, I at every training, I'm like, what is it again? There's P squared. It's proactive and preventative. We're not reactive. So I think that's the one that comes to mind for me.
Kim, that's actually exactly what I wrote down too. I wrote that when I first became the advanced tiers chair for my school, we had these staffing meetings, and it felt like staffing where we came together to talk about kids was really just we're coming together to talk about why these kids, or we're coming together to tell everyone that these kids aren't being successful and we need to put them up for child study. And so the biggest misconception for me is that MTSS is just this like breezeway that gets a child into special education. And I think that it is so difficult because it's like, well, if we're not using this to get a child into special education, what's the process for it? And not everyone understands that process with it. And so it's educating ourselves and the teachers on the things that we can actually do before we get to child study.
And Savannah schools significantly reduced the number of referrals to special ed because students were being much more successful within the framework of the regular classroom, receiving some support through either tier 2 or tier 3. That gets to one of my misconceptions is often you'll hear students described as a tier 2 student, as tier 3 student, when in fact it's the level of services that they're receiving. You might be a fantastic math student, but you have some weak reading skills, you need some additional help there, and then you get that help and hopefully, that gets you right back where you need to be. You're still that same student, you just needed some extra support in one particular area.
So true. I'll chime in here too that I find that people think that MTSS is all about intervention and that universal screeners are only for identifying students who need support or need intervention, when really it's a temperature check on the health of your system. Because if we are identifying so many students that are in need of support or in need of intervention, then we need to go back and look at tier 1 and see what our data tells us about what we can improve there, where we can have this huge impact before they ever come to intervention. I'll add one more too, that, and I know this is a reading focus, but it's not only academics, right? That MTSS could also include problem solving for attendance, for behaviors. And so you really can look at the whole child through this framework.
That's a good point, Stephanie, because I think, sometimes people think MTSS is PBIS. Some people think it's RTI. Well, it covers the gamut. You're really looking at everything to meet student needs, behavior, social, emotional, and academic. So it covers the gamut, and you're trying to meet whatever the student's needs are.
I love that. I think the misconceptions you all hit, we're striking chords, right? We're still striking chords here with everyone on what those misconceptions are that we hear in schools and hearing from you all at the school level, state level, division, right? Those implementation perspectives are great to hear those misconceptions and clarifying that for us. So thank you. All right, so Mike, we're going to tap into you for this question. So how does MTSS, VTSS support all students? And if you can expand on that, how do students qualifying for special education services fit within that MTSS framework?
Well, MTSS is really a school improvement process. It's designed to support all students. If you think about it, basically, you're looking at your data. What do the numbers tell you? Where are your strengths? Where are the areas of weakness that you might have? And you drill down to get that as specific as possible. Then you think about what are the evidence-based practices that need to be implemented to improve that area. And when you do that, you need to then build in systems that support the personnel that are going to implement those effective practices. And hopefully, as you check on your data, you will see improvement. You may need to tweak things. So basically, it's a constant process of putting those practices in place so you can move the needle in areas that your school or division, because you can use it at both levels, need to move. So as for where students with special education fit, they can really receive, like any student, they can receive services at any tier. So you can have special ed students that are largely getting your core curriculum, but might need accommodations and modifications and some services in one particular area. So that was a question I had when I first became an MTSS coach, and that made perfect sense when they explained it to me. I mean, you have students that are not identified as having special ed needs who might require the highest level of support, whereas some special ed students just really need that accommodation modification and some additional services, maybe through some brief pullout or some collaborative services. So they can really fit anywhere within that framework.
Absolutely. And also at the same time in the chat, there was a comment there. It says, the ability of the system to move resources around when needed. And that's exactly what you just explained there with that model there. So thank you. All right, next question. This is for Savannah. So Savannah, your role as an advanced tiers coordinator at the school level. So how do you balance coordinating intervention and student achievement? And what did you learn that you wish you had known earlier?
Yeah, so my role was really kind of twofold. So I was the reading specialist at my school, and as in that role, I was also the advanced tiers co-chair. So we had our tier one meetings and then we had advanced tiers. And I feel like I need to explain that because it seems like I was like a really important person with this, but I really wasn't. And so when I was reading the question about how did I balance coordinating it all, it really was never about me or how I balanced it. It was really all about the system. And the way that I had kind of viewed what we were doing here within this system to make sure that all kids received the proper instruction that they needed, whether it was intervention or within the classroom instruction, was we always kept it focused on the system. So I think of it like a colander. So, we have a colander with really big holes in it, right? And we throw all of our kids into that colander and we shake it about. And most of our kids are going to stay in there, but then there's going to be some that fall through the holes. And so what do? We get a smaller colander, right? We get something that we think is going to catch those kiddos, and still a couple of them fall through. And so then we have to get that fine mesh strainer to have our kiddos so that we hopefully catch all of those kids. And that's really how we had always viewed it. We viewed it as everyone is getting that tier one instruction all the time. And then we're just looking at those holes and we're looking at, is the holes something that the student is lacking? Or really the hardest part of this entire process, if I'm going to be completely honest, is being able to look at ourselves and our own instruction and being able to say that maybe I need to do something differently for a child. And that was without a doubt the hardest thing for me. And I think that the way that we were able to make inroads with it is I have always tried myself to be very open and very willing to change things. Like I am okay with saying, you know what, I've been working with Johnny for the past 3 weeks and what I'm doing is not working. Like, does anybody else have an idea? Is there something else that we could do with the classroom teacher? Or is there a social emotional connection that we need to bring Miss Pham in? So there's all of these things going on and it's never me alone. And then the one thing that I would say I wish that I had learned much earlier in my career is to never lead with your opinion. We always lead with the data. You can argue how you feel about a child's reading. You can argue, about your opinions all day, every day, but data doesn't have opinions. And the data is just telling us whether or not these kids are being successful. And so when I lead from the data, I feel much more empowered because it feels like we are able to truly target what that child needs. And we can't say that tier one instruction is working if the data is not showing that. So always lead with the data, not your opinion. And it's a difficult process, but I will just say quickly, when I first started this, we were my school in particular was like the lowest achieving school for the first 11 years that I was at that school. By the 12th year, we were third in the district for reading. And then in my final year doing that, we were first in the district. So it's a slow approach, but when you do it right, it really works.
That is something to celebrate. Thank you for sharing that. And gosh, some great points you made there, Savannah. So thank you for sharing your expertise and your learning. I think that data, you're speaking to my heart, right? With that data piece and some comments in the chat too. And that analogy created such a visual, right? So I think you're getting some love in the chat also for that analogy that I think some people are going to start using to talk about that process. So thank you. All right, Kim, next question's for you. So working at the division level, how do you look at both school and division data to assess what learning and additional supports are needed? And then if a school needs additional support, what does that look like?
So, to Savannah's point, the data doesn't lie, but we do need to look at several different pieces of data. So, at the division level, we first look at some summative data, some outcome data, that state assessments. Like this time of year, we're really diving into that, but also progress monitoring data. So, what do our benchmarks look like over the course of the year? What do our growth assessments look like? What does our screening data look like? Triangulating that data to figure out some root causes and then deploy resources throughout the division. So, two other pieces of data we also look at are behavior and attendance, because are those impacting individual school data? So, if we find that we have a few schools that they're showing they're trending down in certain areas, we want to look at that behavior data, their attendance data, their subgroup data to see where is the root cause and how can we address those needs. Really looking for those systematic patterns. So if multiple schools are dropping, let's say in the secondary reading comprehension, that's going to flag us that we need to do some professional development in content area literacy strategies, right? If there's a majority. And really, if we see some schools showing like 35% of their students in that tier two, so we've got the triangle, we've got the fat in the middle, then we need to deploy some resources to those schools on how to strengthen that tier one instruction, that core support. But if we're finding that, also we've got some behavior issues at that school, looking at what are their tier one behavior systems and processes that they have in place, and teaming up with the behavior interventionists to provide supports that way as well. But we really try to look at that monthly and school progress and to progress monitor what we're doing and how we're deploying our resources to be able to support our schools. We focus a lot on systems. So one of our systems where we can get a lot of this work done is through that PLC process, making sure that we're backwards planning, we're incorporating those, looking at the assessment, looking at the planning, looking at what's happening in the classroom, so we can really target what the root cause is, so we can provide those supports at the school level.
Thank you. I think we could make a sticker for triangulating data too, right? So once that they had
That's right.
so thank you for mentioning that, and those multiple sources of data to help us with having those discussions, and then the power of our PLCs with that too. So thank you, Kim.
You're welcome.
All right, Stephanie, you've worked at various levels. So looking at this one here at the high school level, what considerations did you have to make to implement an early warning system, or EWS? And then, continue on with that, what barriers do high schools face that elementary schools may not? And what does MTSS look like at that secondary level? So lots to talk about here. What you got, Stephanie?
All right, sure. So, an early warning system just being this process for identifying students who show signs that they might not, when it first began, might not graduate from high school on time. Since it has expanded into this not only on-time graduation, but who's at risk of not meeting like some key educational milestones, right? So we use our SIS, our Student Information System. It has a built-in early warning system, or EWS module, but there are also some tools that have been built from resources like the American Institute of Research and so on. So as we started building this out, we really had to first get some shared understandings, have some common vocabulary, so to speak. So how are we defining at risk? How are we defining on-time graduation? And just make sure that we're operating from those common understandings. Also, just deciding what risk factors are we going to look at. So, the literature really points to the ABCs, right? Attendance, behavior referrals, and course failure. And so those are the ones that we decided. We also put universal screeners in there as well. But just deciding what are those indicators of risk going to be, and then what are the thresholds for each of those? So when the student reaches this number, we need to start looking at that. The other thing is just having some teaming structures at the school. Okay, so like who is going to be looking at that data? Who's going to be involved in the problem solving process? Who owns this, so to speak? And then what are the processes and procedures that we build around this tool, right? Because the EWS is a tool, and then knowing what you're going to do with this information is really the art of it, I think. So we had to really consider, all right, like how often are we going to look at this data? Some of the things were not new things, but it's just bringing consistency to all students in our division so that, they all have the same opportunity to receive that support or challenge. But some of that, like, how will our meetings go? How will we discuss the data? How will we discuss, what could be contributing factors or root causes? And so in that early warning system, we can see attendance, behavior, hopefully soon those SEL screeners, and their course grades or universal screeners so that we really get a whole picture and we can really dig into root causes and then assigning an intervention. Right? And then who's going to deliver the intervention? Who's going to monitor it? When will we come back together and check on the process? So we quickly found that building the system was the easy part, and the decisions about the teaming and the processes that surround it were really the art of it, right? As far as in high school, there are some challenges there, right? Like mostly being the master schedule. It's not like elementary where we have our nice little intervention blocks and enrichment blocks and but as far as what MTSS looks like in high school, it really big picture is still schools using data to make decisions around core instruction and supports, right? Like, are there patterns that need to be addressed? How do we problem solve for individual students? I think Mike mentioned earlier that MTSS is really school improvement. So how are we using that data to write goals and think about our strategic actions for school improvement? And then also, as far as intervention goes in the high school, challenging, but of course we have our intervention courses, right, that students may be enrolled in. But then there's this like, kind of scary area where we really need leaders that are like courageous and creative and willing to do things with that master schedule as far as flex blocks, or, I have heard of schools doing things like, all right, we're going to take this elective course and 8 to 10 weeks of it are going to be intervention. And then we'll see if you go back over into this other elective. And so this is an area where we really need to continue the conversation, right? And find those courageous leaders that we can really learn from.
Thank you. Lots to share there on that topic and some information and things in the chat. One thing a lot of the panelists had mentioned, which you mentioned too, is that team approach and data, right? So we're seeing some commonalities just even within the different questions and misconceptions and things that we're looking at here. So thank you for sharing that. I think also, there's scheduling is definitely something people are connecting with and looking at that piece there. So a challenge, but thank you for some tips. And I like that courageousness that we're encouraging to consider some things so that we can continue to support our students with this. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, so our panel, if you had one resource that you would return to again and again as you think about MTSS process, what would that be?
Savannah, I can go. At the risk of sounding super cheesy, and I wasn't going to say this, I was going to choose something else, but I wanted to be honest with it. The greatest resource that we have that we can turn to again and again is the people around us. When you have a team of people that are all invested in the well-being of kids, nothing can beat that. You know, I had Mike's number where I could text Mike if I had an issue. I had my co-chair on the MTSS committee. I had my other reading specialist. I had my team, and I had absolutely no shame about going to them and saying that I need help. And so none of us know it all. And none of us can do it all. And so I just want to really encourage you to find your people in a school because they are your greatest resource. Sorry if it was cheesy, it's just true.
That is so true, Savannah. I agree. I agree. The answer's in the room, right? But if I were to pick another resource, I'm a podcast girl. I drive 30 miles to work every day, so I'm always looking for something to listen to. Branching Minds has a school and around, it's called Podcast, and there are tons of podcasts on there about MTSS, like for most recent, what MTSS progress really looks like, and it's leaders across the country that share. There's one in here for lessons for superintendents, how to build MTSS teacher buy-in. So that's something I always go to, and they're not all amazing, but a lot of them are really helpful.
I'll share one of the things that I really liked when I first became an MTSS coach was a book by McIntosh and Goodman, Integrating Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Blending RTI and PBIS. And as a coach, I always continued to go back to that book. It just had a wealth of information and things that you could use effectively or think about your situation. And the PBIS.org website has tons of stuff. I want to say Roberta put something in the chat with a link to resources, and that was something we were always using with various divisions in schools. So those are two really helpful things that I used frequently.
I really like the NCII website, the National Center for Intensive Intervention. There are so many tools and resources there that can be downloaded and used as is or modified to your situation. I go there quite often. And that's a free resource. A paid resource that I love too is the MTSS Collective. So there's a membership, but they have weekly meetings, and you have the opportunity to interact with people at different levels and in different places. And it's just a source of great ideas.
Thank you, panelists. All of you in answering the questions, going through this really showed your areas of expertise, and I appreciate you being open and sharing your experiences and things you've gone through, your tips along the way for all this. I think there's, looking in the chat too, it's relatable, everything that you're sharing, and we appreciate that motivation and inspiration that you've sparked in us tonight. So thank you again, panelists.
It's been great being here. So nice talking to everybody. I loved having such an active chat.
Yes. And on behalf of both Virginia and DC chapters, I think we're all thanking the panelists for sharing their expertise and insights on how MTSS and literacy intersect. As part of our reading is an optional wrap up, we do appreciate you for helping us think more deeply about how we can use strong MTSS to ensure students receive the right support at the right time through a systems framework. All right, so here's a quote from National. At every level, connection is at the heart of what we do, bringing research to practice, knowledge to educators, and students to the opportunities they deserve. And it's because of you, because hashtag it takes a league. So Savannah, not cheesy at all. And I think tonight was a wonderful example of that. Do we have Jenny coming in on this slide here?
I don't know if Jenny. So we would really encourage you, if you're interested in becoming a member of the Virginia Reading League, to attend more free events like this one, and also to get a reduced cost on our upcoming conference that's coming up. We encourage you to scan the QR code and become a member. This year, our membership is hosted by one of our contributors, and so we're very excited to offer and continue to offer great learning opportunities throughout the year. And we would love to have you be a part of the board. Sorry, part of the organization, excuse me.
Yep, Jenny here. Thank you. I was I'm overwhelmed with back to school stuff, so I was here and listening. But yes, please join us, both reading leagues.
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for the Reading League Virginia Conference. I attended and presented last year. It was fantastic. But also the DC chapter as well is really actually convenient if you're in the DMV because most of our events are hosted at Planet Word, which is right off the Metro Center Metro stop. Makes getting there really easy, especially after school during rush hour, that sort of thing. And we have fantastic speakers, these national reading rock stars come in and speak to the most relevant current issues at hand. And then we have these into practice seminars where our people in the classrooms come together and share best practices that are very practical and all related to the research. That's really great. So we would love to have you join DC too, and you can join more than one. You can join both. So please join.
And we hope that if you're interested in more events like this, that you'll consider joining us at our national organization is hosting their annual conference in Chicago from September the 30th through October the 2nd. And we had last year, some of our board members attended, and we hope to see some of you there. Again, it's a really great convening of everyone who is just really passionate about advancing student achievement, particularly in the science of reading. And so we hope to see you there. And then we also have, and just wanted to let you know about upcoming second annual conference, which is going to happen on February 11th. And it will be in Richmond, Virginia at the Doubletree Hotel in Midlothian. And if you're interested in sharing some of your expertise, and we would encourage you to please submit a proposal. And then our members only registration, which is still going on, is up through the 31st of August. And so we really hope that you'll join us. It was a great year. Last year, we sold out very quickly this last year. And so we hope that you can join us again. And then we just want to wrap up by saying thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy week. We know that this is back to school season and it can be very busy, but we are really grateful for our panelists and for all of you that showed up and joined in the chat and shared your experiences and really thinking about how we can support all students. We hope you have a great night. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.